6 weeks had passed. 6 weeks since a park ranger found 18-year-old Nolan Wells in the water near the northwest tip of a barrier island off the Mississippi coast. 6 weeks since a family lost a son. And 6 weeks since the question that began this story remained unanswered. What happened to Nolan Wells? For his parents, there was no mystery about what they wanted. They wanted an answer, not a theory. Not an argument between strangers on social media, not competing narratives from lawyers and commentators. An answer. Nolan was 18 years old. He played wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College and was only weeks away from turning 19. On July 3rd, the night before Independence Day, Nolan cooked dinner for his family. The following morning, he went out with friends. It was supposed to be a holiday. A boat, an island, friends, sun, water, and eventually, home. But Nolan never came home. That is the point where the story changes, because almost everything that follows depends on what happened during the hours between Nolan leaving home and the moment he was found 2 days later. And that timeline has become increasingly difficult to reconstruct. According to the material examined for this documentary, an official autopsy was conducted on July 7th. The report exists, but it remains sealed. Nolan's family then commissioned an independent examination, hoping perhaps that another medical review could provide an explanation. Instead, they reportedly received a conclusion that offered almost no certainty at all. Undetermined. That word needs to be understood before anything else. Undetermined does not mean homicide. It does not mean accident. It does not mean that someone else caused Nolan's death. It means the available information did not permit the examiner to definitively establish the cause and manner of death. And that distinction is critical, because when the official record leaves unanswered questions, something inevitably moves in to fill the vacuum. Speculation, rumor, accusation, defense, counter-accusation, and eventually competing versions of the same day. This documentary is not going to decide the case for you. We are not going to call Nolan's death a murder when the evidence presented here does not establish that. We are not going to accuse the young men who were with him of causing his death. They have not been charged, and we are not going to treat their denials as proof that every question has been answered. Instead, we are going to separate three things: what is established, what is claimed, and what remains unknown, because those three categories have increasingly become blurred. And nowhere is that more important than the timeline. According to the defense presented publicly, the three young men left Horn Island at approximately 4:30 p.m. Then comes the claim that could potentially change the way those final hours are understood. Two people, according to attorney Edward Paltzik, allegedly saw Nolan alive at approximately 5:50 p.m. If independently confirmed, that creates a 90-minute gap between the alleged departure and the reported sighting. 90 minutes. Long enough to matter. But before we examine that claim, we need to understand how the people at the center of the defense describe what happened after Nolan disappeared. And we need to hear their words before we examine them.
You know, obviously, before this happened, I would assume you're living a regular life, young guys being in college, having a typical experience, then you lose your friend.
I think, ever since it happened, my life just, hit like a hole. Even going out, we're always paranoid somebody's gonna see us, get spotted, try to beat us up potentially, or even worse.
Before we examine the legal arguments, hear how the people who returned from the island say the aftermath changed their lives. Grief can affect everyone surrounding a tragedy differently. So can fear. Neither feeling by itself establishes what happened on the island. The setting matters. This is not a courtroom. It is a public defense. Three young men are seated alongside attorneys J. Tyler Cox and Edward Paltzik. Paltzik is introduced as a defamation attorney who has handled high-profile public disputes. And almost immediately, the purpose of the interview becomes apparent. The attorneys are not presenting a final medical explanation for Nolan's death. They are defending three young men who say they have been unfairly blamed for something they did not do. That is an important distinction, because defending someone's reputation is different from reconstructing a death. The first argument is therefore not about forensic evidence. It is about character.
An injustice in one place is an injustice everywhere. I hate lying. I care about the truth, but most of all, it's the actual people who are involved here. So first of all, I just want to say Tyler Cox really welcomed me here. My co-counsel, he's an incredible human being and he's an incredible attorney. And then after that, I had an opportunity to meet these incredible young men. And I just got to say, these guys are unbelievable. Warren, Jackson, Morgan, they're just beautiful people. They're really decent human beings. They're just great people. And that's why I'm here, because I want to help.
Listen carefully to the first argument the attorney makes. It is about character. The lawyer describes the situation as tragic and unjust. But notice what he does not claim to know. He does not claim to know the medical cause of Nolan's death. Instead, he argues that the three young men should not be publicly portrayed as responsible for it. That distinction becomes increasingly important because there are two separate questions. What happened to Nolan? And are the three young men responsible for it? The first question remains unresolved in the publicly available material examined here. The second is being categorically denied by the defense. Those positions can exist simultaneously. A person can deny responsibility while the underlying circumstances of a death remain uncertain, and that is precisely why every statement needs to be placed in context. The interview then turns toward the lives of the three young men after Nolan's death.
I think like ever since it happened, my life just like hit like a hole, it just stopped. And I mean, we just got to live day by day from now on. I could say definitely a whole flip upside down for our lives. It's like even going out, we're always paranoid somebody's gonna see us, get spotted, try to beat us up potentially, or even worse. We're really just trying to stay low key and not go out as much or anything like that. Yeah.
It's been hard because my friends and I are people. I mean, we like to be out and hang out outside of our friend group, and not being able to like go certain places or, walk around in public because our head's always on a swivel. It's really affected all of us. I mean, especially in like my family's standpoint, my safety comes first. My friends and family safety come first too, and it's been really hard because I'm worried about like my family as well with me, and it's hard. But we're just going day by day and just trying to get through every day.
They describe a community that once felt familiar and now feels different. Their experiences are part of the story, but they are not evidence of what happened to Nolan. That distinction has to remain intact. They describe online harassment, confrontations, fear, and what they say were threats directed toward them and members of their families. Those allegations deserve to be taken seriously if they are accurately described. But they still belong to the aftermath, not the forensic reconstruction.
We have had countless death threats online, been spotted. I'll let you elaborate more on that, being spotted.
I mean, people have obviously just pointed us out. I mean, as a group and even on a one-on-one setting, I think it's really just like awkward because I don't want to talk about this, and I know my friends don't want to talk about this any more than we need to. We're still mourning one of our best friends' death, and it's hard to speak about it when, like sometimes we just need some alone time, or sometimes we just need to, lay back and not be around all this. And I mean, I've been called out in public, and I haven't been in public that much. I know my friends have had encounters in public. The threats have been insane from, my stepmom and my dad, my mom, just everyone included, like even my brothers and my sisters. And it's just hard. I mean, it's unbelievable where like this has been taken to and the level where this is at.
They say the attention did not stop with them. They say it reached their families as well. If accurately described, those experiences are serious. But again, they answer a different question. They tell us about the aftermath. They do not establish what happened on Horn Island. And that distinction is one of the most important principles in this entire investigation. A consequence is not necessarily evidence of the event that preceded it. The young men's experiences may demonstrate how intensely the case has been debated. They do not tell us what happened to Nolan. The conversation then moves to another alleged confrontation.
Right. I wouldn't say like that. I think I haven't been denied, anything, but like Trayson, it's hard to hear from a good friend of mine that he's getting denied a Gatorade and a Red Bull before work and having to, like, he calls me, he's like, dude, you won't believe what just happened. He got called out at Walmart. Someone called him out at Walmart and was like asking him all these questions and trying to press him about it. And it's crazy to me. Like, we live in a very tight-knit community, and for people to, push back and say these things when they know what Ocean Springs is like, it's really hard. And I mean, I haven't had many personal encounters, but I know being around the guys and stuff like that, they have, so.
The young men describe how quickly the controversy followed them into ordinary public places. Those encounters may demonstrate how intense the public reaction became. They are not forensic evidence. And now the interview changes direction. The lawyers are asked about their legal strategy. What happens when accusations spread publicly before an investigation has reached a final conclusion? And what happens when a family seeking answers believes the people around their son may know more than they are saying? Those questions collide here.
And Ed, as an attorney that's representing these boys, I mean, what does that make you feel like? Do you feel like you got a good case here, or, what's your perspective in that? Because, people are online and obviously they know who you are. Obviously they know you represented Donald Trump in some pretty high profile cases. And so now that you've joined, or at least now you work for the young men here, you hear them say things like they've been accosted, they've been, threatened online. Does that make your case a greater case, or how do you work within what's happening to these young men?
Well, unfortunately, I wish there was no case. I wish this hadn't happened. But unfortunately, because these things did happen, there is a case, and now there's multiple cases. And I'm going to tell you something. If you're out there and you lied about these guys, you lied about my guys, you lied about Tyler's guys here, if you lied about Morgan, if you lied about Jax, if you lied about Warren, we're going to get you. And you're going to be hauled into court, you're going to be held accountable, and it's going to be very painful. And what I would say to the people who have done that is, now's your chance. If you want to apologize and retract before you find yourself in court, you should probably do that now. Because if you don't do that, once you're in court, now you just can't leave. You won't be able to get out of it. And we're not going to name names because there's some other folks who are doing that, and we want to be better than that. And I want to emphasize this, right? We're not here to guess. We're not here to speculate. We're only going to deal in facts, right? And here's the most important thing, right? We don't know how Nolan Wells died. No one here is saying we know. But what we do know is Morgan, Jax, and Warren had nothing whatsoever to do with Nolan Wells' death. And that's what's important. And unfortunately, because there are people who want to divide a town and come in from the outside and tell people what to think and pit neighbor against neighbor, it compounds the tragedy. It magnifies the tragedy. And I just want to say this. Here's why it's an even bigger tragedy. Because my friends here, Morgan, Jax, and Warren, these guys are not just the finest that Ocean Springs has to offer, finest that Mississippi has to offer. These are the finest young men that America has to offer. Really great people. And Tyler Tyler actually taught me good Ocean Springs people. That was one of the first things I heard when I got here. So I'll just say that they're good Ocean Springs people.
Now listen closely. This is where the defense makes two separate claims. The first claim is that the lawyers do not know exactly how Nolan died. The second is that their clients had nothing to do with his death. Those statements are not identical. The first acknowledges uncertainty. The second is a categorical defense. And that difference matters, because a person can strongly deny responsibility while the underlying circumstances of a death remain unresolved. That distinction should remain at the center of any responsible discussion of this case. The public does not have the sealed autopsy. The public does not have every investigative file. The public does not have the complete statements of every potential witness. So confidence should be proportional to evidence. The host then asks Palcic how certain he can be when his involvement is relatively recent.
All right,
Confidence not a strong enough word. In fact, beyond a reasonable doubt is not strong enough. There's a 0% chance that they did anything wrong. So this is not 90%, it's not 99%, it's not 99.9999. There's no decimals, there's no anything. It's 100%, 100.000%, nothing. They did nothing wrong, and that's the problem for our opponents here, who have ruined their lives, dragged them through the mud, and attacked them. You don't get to lie. We have a First Amendment, we love our First Amendment, but you don't get to lie and hurt people. You want to lie and it doesn't hurt people? Fine. You lie and you hurt people, that's why we have defamation. And that's what this is about. So I just want to emphasize this in the strongest possible terms. Zero wrongdoing. Completely innocent, totally innocent, and categorically innocent.
Listen to how certainty is expressed. That is advocacy. It is not an autopsy finding. It is not a police determination. And it is not a verdict. The legal presumption of innocence remains important here. So does the distinction between a defense position and independently established evidence. That distinction becomes even more important when the discussion turns to a particular restaurant encounter.
We went to a restaurant, a couple of buddies of mine, and when we were, I wouldn't say threatening with weapons or anything, but I felt, and I know my friends felt, threat for our lives. I mean, I don't think there was like a fear factor, but at the same time, like it's awkward in public, like I stated, like when we have to talk about these things. But we went to a restaurant and someone came up to me and was like, "Is this you?" And I was kind of like shaken up about it. Well, at first she asked like my name and like all these questions, and I was like, okay, whatever, she's just coming up to talk. Well, then she came up to me again and showed me our first interview and was like, "Are you sure this isn't you?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, that's me, like obviously." And she kind of just, I looked at my buddy and I was like, "Yeah, we're leaving, like close everything out, like we're going." And I left, and there was an altercation after I left with some of my buddies that weren't involved in this at all. And they told my friends that they were gonna kill them and they wanted to fight and all this like crazy stuff. I mean, I wasn't there, but my friends told me this, that what the people were saying to them was like totally just crazy. Like, I mean, there was people like that were, outside of this telling us like, "Hey, you need to leave before something happens, because I know what could go down right now. And like, I know that these people are crazy." So, I mean, we all felt, we were kind of shaken up about that. It was weird because it was our first encounter as a group. And I think it's also like just crazy that people will like look at you in the eye and tell you they'll kill you because they believe you killed your best friend and you have nothing to do with it.
For the first time, the interview moves from general claims about public hostility to a specific incident. But listen carefully to the chain of information. Some of what is described was experienced directly. Other parts were reportedly communicated afterward. That distinction matters whenever we are reconstructing an investigation. Morgan and Jax then discuss that same encounter. Their recollections become another example of why corroboration matters.
I didn't hear the part where they said they were gonna kill him and stuff, but I did hear whenever she came up to him originally, she was like, "Hey, you have like TikTok or anything like that? Your face looks really familiar." And he was like, "No, I don't have TikTok or anything like that." And she was like, "Oh, okay," and then walked off, and then came back with, like you said, the first interview on her phone, and showing him. She's like, "So this isn't you. Either you have a doppelganger or this is you." And he was like, "Well, yeah, that's me." And then we got the check, and we bounced, and we were waiting outside for everybody else to get out of there. And while we're waiting outside is whenever some of our other buddies that aren't even on social media that we were just there with was getting told that other people were going to kill them and all that kind of stuff.
So how did that make you guys feel when did you think they were serious? Did you think it was just people trying to make a name for themselves by confronting you in front of others? Like, what was your take on that, Morgan?
I think it was just like, I was in the general area of where one of our buddies was, where this altercation happened. And I actually got into a conversation with a fellow next to me that wasn't even involved. And he told me straight up, he was like, "If I was y'all right now, I would leave before y'all get hurt. Y'all need to leave right now. I'm just watching out for y'all."
Different witnesses can remember the same moment differently. That is precisely why corroboration matters. The accounts overlap in some places and diverge in others. That does not automatically make one person dishonest. It simply means the public record should not turn differing recollections into a single, unquestionable narrative. And now, the conversation goes back to the beginning. July 4th, Horn Island, Nolan, and the first public version of what happened.
So first off, I wish that none of this would ever happen. I wish Nolan could still be here with us today. And I wish that, like I said, none of this would ever happen. Like, I wish that all this could be erased and Nolan could be here tomorrow. I mean, that's more than anything. But other than that, I feel like his mom blasting us on social media from the get-go, saying that he was out there with Warren and another guy. That's where it first started to take off. And then also the fact that she posted a picture of me and Morgan and another guy and Nolan on the boat together, blasting that out there, pushing this narrative, kind of, I guess. I wish that would have never happened either. And I don't think if those would have never happened, a lot of this stuff wouldn't have been as viral or gone all over the country at this point. I mean, this is a countrywide news story that is just blown out of proportion. And the fact that it was our best friend and it's not what people are saying it is what hurts the most. I mean, that was our brother. I mean, straight up. That's what I told his dad the night that he came over to my house. He was like, blah, blah, saying something. I was like, "Dude, that was my brother." Like, and you know that. He knows that. We were picking him up every single day. He never drove. I can't tell you how many times I pulled up in his driveway and picked him up. And it wasn't him asking. It was just because that's what we did. We just picked up Nolan all the time. That's how we, came about to all the stuff that we were going to. We'd go and pick him up. That's how much we like to be around him. We would do stuff like that all the time,
Well, first off, like, I wish we would have never, like, I think about this every day. Like, I wish we would have never went out on the 4th of July because I know this wouldn't have happened. Nolan wouldn't be gone. And it's really hard to think about because it's like, I wish I would have done this different, or I wish I would have done that different, because now one of my brothers wouldn't have passed away. But I think from the beginning, I'm glad that I called the Coast Guard, and I'm glad that we came together as a group, even from the first day when people started texting us things, saying, crazy things. But I wish it wouldn't have been reported as some type of race thing. I think it's really bad that, like, people are pushing the narrative, oh, this is a race thing. Well, obviously it's not. I mean, this is like a brother to us. I mean, Nolan's no different than anyone else in our group. And I just wish this wasn't pushed on the media as, oh, this is a bunch of white guys that killed a black guy, or this is, you know, like in the beginning it was like 4 guys went to a stranded island and dumped Nolan at the island and just left him there. Like even from the beginning, it was just like this thing and no one had facts and they were just pushing this horrible narrative, all lies about everyone, and it's sick. So I wish that would have been completely different. I'm glad I called the Coast Guard. I'm glad I made the first contact within all of this. I'm glad I was the first one that called Christine Wells that night and told her that we haven't heard from her son. And I'm glad that I did all of that, but I hate the way this has been perceived by the media and portrayed. This has like been absolutely horrible with the way and the things that they've said to us and done. But other than that, I mean, there's not much I would change from my point of view and my friend's point of view. I think we did everything right, and I know.
The answer begins with something simple. He wishes Nolan were still alive. From there, the account becomes an argument over how the public first learned about Nolan's disappearance. He says early social media posts and photographs caused suspicion to spread before investigators had publicly established the facts. He describes Nolan as a close friend. He explains that because Nolan did not drive, the group frequently picked him up. That detail matters because it provides context for why Nolan was traveling with these young men on July 4th. But friendship is not evidence of innocence. And a photograph is not evidence of guilt. Both can become powerful parts of a public narrative without resolving what happened. He also describes his role in contacting the Coast Guard and communicating with Nolan's family. Those actions are important to examine, but they must be examined alongside everything else. He says he believes the public transformed a friendship into a story about race and wrongdoing. There is an important point here. It is entirely possible for a public narrative to become distorted. It is also possible for legitimate questions about a disappearance to exist at the same time. Those ideas are not mutually exclusive. The challenge is determining which claims can be supported.
I also want to say, I think it's so criminal that they took something so anti-racist and flipped it into something super racist. Like they took, this is the definition of anti-racism. I mean, that we did not look at Nolan any different than I looked at him, or even you. You know, this is literally our brother. I mean, like we stated, we did not treat him any different. We didn't treat Trayson any different. We don't treat Trayson any different. And they just flipped it. And I just think that is so wild that they're pushing this thing that they're saying, oh, they want to end racism and all this stuff. Well, they're the one pushing it. They're pushing the racism. And I just think that's kind of crazy.
Morgan, what's your thoughts on this? How does it affect you?
I mean, first I want to say wish this would have never happened. I wish Nolan would still be here with us today. And but in my opinion, I think that the media, they shouldn't have pushed a narrative from so early. I think that they should have let the local officials do their job, let them release statements, and then, I mean, the media is obviously going to see that and then do whatever they do. But that's what I mean. I trust the local officials.
Ed, with what has transpired, you know, how does that dictate your response? Because you have a 30,000 foot view of all of this stuff, right? You see the way that it could have went, and you see.
This is where the defense makes a broader argument about the way the case was discussed publicly. A friendship between people from different backgrounds does not establish what happened on July 4th. Neither does a photograph. The important question is what the evidence shows. Morgan then makes a related argument about the timing of public reporting.
Morgan, what's your thoughts on this? How does it affect you?
First I want to say, wish this would have never happened. I wish Nolan would still be here with us today. And, but in my opinion, I think that the media, they shouldn't have pushed a narrative from so early. I think that they should have let the local officials do their job, let them release statements, and then, I mean, the media is obviously going to see that and then do whatever they do. But that's what I mean. I trust the local officials.
Morgan's concern is about sequence. There is a reasonable principle behind that argument. Early reporting can be incomplete, but there is another principle that matters just as much. When official information is limited, the public has a right to ask questions. The challenge is asking those questions without turning suspicion into certainty. And now we reach the part of the interview that could potentially have the greatest investigative significance: the timeline. The defense is about to make a claim involving Nolan's whereabouts after the three young men say they left the island. Before we hear it, remember the standard. A claim can be important without yet being proven.
Sure, and I want to be clear about something. Tonight, I'm not going to give any particular person any more oxygen than they may have already sucked up. But I will say this. What's been said about Morgan, Jax, and Warren, I'm not going to call them untruths or half-truths or falsehoods. I'm going to call it what it is: lies. So the first thing that's really important here is we're dealing with lies and liars. We're dealing with profiteers. We're dealing with hustlers. And one thing that I've seen since I got here is that Ocean Springs, Mississippi, is a really beautiful place. And the region is very beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful places in the country. And there is just no question, the death of Nolan Wells is a horrendous tragedy. But for the tragedy to then be magnified after his death for no reason other than profit is a disgrace, or what we would call a shanda. And I had the opportunity to go to Horn Island today with Tyler and Warren and Jax. And a lot of people who have been sucking up way more oxygen than they're entitled to have not been to the island. I'm willing to bet that a lot of the hustlers and profiteers and liars have not been to that island. And you have to go to that island. And being at the island today was revelatory. It was really illuminating. It's a very dynamic marine environment, first of all. But when you go to the island, you see instantly that what some people want to be true, what they wish to be true, they're trying to wish it to be true. They're trying to make it true through their lies. It's actually not possible. It is a very, very long and narrow barrier island. It's basically very low sand dunes. And in the particular part of the island that we're dealing with, there are no trees. There's hardly any foliage, hardly any tree cover, hardly any plants, and it's wide open. And on July 4th, there were thousands of people there. There is no possible way that anybody could have committed a murder in broad daylight on a barren, windswept island that is narrow and was just swamped with people that day in broad daylight. It's just not possible given the natural environment there. And that leads me to the next point, which is this. Once you know what the timeline is, when you combine the timeline with the actual dynamics of the island itself, all of the lies completely unravel because it isn't possible, and here's why. Morgan, Warren, and Jax left the island at about 4:30 p.m. That's it. They were gone. That is not open for debate. So that's a fact. They were gone. And at that time, Nolan Wells was still alive. Now, I'm not going to name them out of respect for their privacy, but just as one example, there are two very fine, upstanding members of the Ocean Springs community who saw Nolan Wells at about 10 minutes to 6 p.m. So about an hour and a half after these fine young men had left the island. They were gone, departed. Nolan Wells was alive. And these two witnesses, two very reliable, very credible, and very upstanding members of the community, they saw Nolan. And they've known Nolan for years. There's no chance that they made a mistake. And by the way, this can be corroborated through other evidence, other eyewitness accounts. And that's the end of it right there. And that's before we get into everything else about the situation.
This is the central claim of the defense. Hear it in full. Then we will examine what it actually establishes. If the account is independently verified, it could be highly significant. According to Paltzik, the three young men left Horn Island at approximately 4:30 p.m. He then says two people saw Nolan alive at approximately 5:50 p.m. That creates a 90-minute gap. And 90 minutes can change an investigation. But there is a major problem. The witnesses have not been publicly identified in this source. Their statements have not been released here. No affidavit has been presented. No independent testimony from them has been shown, and the alleged corroborating evidence has not been publicly produced. That does not prove the claim is false. It means the public cannot independently evaluate it. That distinction is essential. If you want true crime investigations that separate documented evidence from allegations and don't tell you what to think before the evidence is in, subscribe to the channel. Cases like Nolan Wells's are complicated precisely because the most important answers are often buried beneath incomplete timelines, conflicting accounts, and information that is not yet public. Subscribe if you want to follow the evidence as this story develops, rather than simply follow the loudest theory. The interview then turns toward an audio recording that has become part of the broader debate.
I've taken this situation and clearly lied to the public. One being the phone call. What is your thoughts on that phone call to Cito? Some people have gone out and done enhancements to the audio, and in doing that, created a transcript manually. It doesn't appear that the transcript was derived from an automated system or have any, in my opinion, real integrity with it. What are your thoughts, first, you guys, on the audio, and then I'll get to you, Ed, on could that be a defamatory area the way it was produced? So what do you guys think about that audio?
This is where another unresolved issue enters the discussion. And this is where the available source material stops. The responses to that question are not contained in the material used for this documentary. We will not manufacture them. Instead, we return to the timeline, because that is where the case becomes difficult. Nolan Xavier Wells cooked dinner for his family on July 3rd. The next day, he went to Horn Island with friends. At least in the beginning, there was nothing unusual about the plan. A holiday on the Mississippi coast, a boat, an island, friends. But at some point, according to the account given by those who were there, the boat experienced mechanical trouble. The bilge system was reportedly not functioning as expected. The group decided to return. According to their account, Nolan chose to remain on the island and return later with another group. And then comes the timestamp that has now become central to the defense. Approximately 4:30 p.m., the three young men say they departed. If that timeline is correct, Nolan was still alive when they left. But that is only the beginning of the question, because Nolan still had to get home, and something happened between that afternoon and the moment he was found. A missing person report followed. Search operations began. The United States Coast Guard, Jackson County authorities, Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and National Park Service personnel became involved. The search extended across the island and surrounding waters. 2 days after Nolan disappeared, a park ranger located him in the water near the island's northwest end. The question immediately changed. It was no longer, where is Nolan Wells? It became, how did Nolan Wells die? And that is a much harder question. An early public possibility reportedly involved an accidental explanation. But early possibilities are not final findings. Investigations evolve. Evidence is collected. Testing is performed. Medical examinations are completed. And conclusions can change. According to the material examined here, an official autopsy was completed on July 7th, but the report remains sealed. The family then pursued an independent examination, and the result was reportedly undetermined. That word has become one of the most important words in this case, because it creates a boundary. We can say Nolan died. We can say where he was found. We can discuss the timeline presented publicly. We can discuss what the defense says. We can discuss what the family has been seeking. But we cannot responsibly fill the gaps in the medical evidence with assumptions. Undetermined does not give the public permission to choose whichever explanation feels most convincing. It tells us that the available information did not establish a definitive conclusion. And that uncertainty is precisely why the 90-minute claim matters. If Nolan was alive at 5:50 p.m., then something happened after that point. But even that would not solve the entire case. It would only move the timeline. It could potentially support the defense's claim that the three young men had already departed. It could potentially provide investigators with additional witnesses. It could potentially identify the last known period in which Nolan was alive. But it would not by itself establish the cause of death. And it would not by itself eliminate every possible scenario. That is why the identity of those witnesses matters. The public has heard the claim. But the public has not been shown the underlying evidence in the material examined here. No names, no statements, no affidavit, no publicly presented photograph, no publicly presented video, no independent testimony. That does not mean the witnesses do not exist. It means their account remains unverified to the public, and there is a significant difference between those two statements. If you value that distinction between what someone says happened and what can actually be corroborated, subscribe now. This channel is built around following the timeline, examining the claims, and revisiting the evidence when new information emerges. Subscribe because the most important part of an investigation isn't being first to declare an answer. It's being willing to change the answer when the evidence changes. There is another reason the timeline matters. Horn Island is not an ordinary neighborhood. It is a barrier island approximately 10 miles from the Mississippi coast and part of Gulf Island's national seashore. There are no ordinary roads connecting it to the mainland. Visitors generally arrive by boat. And on a major holiday, the island can have significant numbers of visitors. Paltzik has emphasized that environment in his public argument. His point is essentially that the island was populated and open enough that a serious incident might have been noticed. That argument may be relevant, but it has limitations. An open environment does not prove that nothing happened, nor does it prove that something did. Geography can help investigators evaluate possibilities. It cannot independently establish a conclusion, and that same principle applies to the online theories surrounding Nolan's disappearance. A theory repeated thousands of times does not become evidence simply because it becomes popular. Likewise, a lawyer's confident statement does not become evidence simply because it is delivered forcefully. The standard has to remain the same for everyone. Evidence, corroboration, documentation, timeline. That is what matters. There is another element of the story that has received significant attention. One of the young men, Warren Hudson, had previously spoken publicly about the case. Hudson denied involvement in Nolan's death. He also denied involvement in allegations concerning Nolan's phone. He said Nolan had been asked to leave the island with the group and chose to remain. Those statements are important because they establish his position. But again, a statement from someone defending himself is not the same thing as an independent investigative finding. The public has also focused on Hudson's family. His mother, Ashley Cole, is a Mississippi Chancery Court judge. That connection generated questions about whether her position could have influenced the investigation. But the material examined here does not establish that she interfered with the investigation. That distinction is essential. A family connection may generate legitimate questions. It does not establish misconduct. And this principle should apply across the board. A lawyer's reputation does not establish innocence. A parent's accusation does not establish guilt. A social media post does not establish a timeline. A photograph does not establish what happened afterward. And a missing piece of information does not automatically prove that someone is hiding something. The responsible approach is more difficult. It requires patience. It requires skepticism. And sometimes it requires saying, "We don't know yet," because beneath all the arguments are people. Nolan was not a headline. He was 18. He had teammates. He had friends. He had parents. He had routines. He cooked dinner for his family the night before he disappeared. He played football. He had plans. He was approaching his 19th birthday. And then, on a summer holiday, he went to an island with people he knew. That ordinary beginning is part of what makes the ending so painful. For Nolan's parents, the question is not theoretical. They are not debating a viral story. They are trying to understand what happened to their son. And for the three young men who say they left the island that afternoon, the stakes are different but also profound. They say they lost a friend. They say they have been publicly accused of causing his death. They say their families have suffered as a result, and through their attorneys, they are now pushing back. Both realities can exist. A family can demand answers, and people accused publicly can defend themselves. Those positions are not mutually exclusive. The challenge is refusing to let either position replace evidence. That may be the most important lesson in this entire case. Let's return to the clock. 4:30 p.m. According to the defense, the boat leaves Horn Island. 5:50 p.m. According to the defense, two people allegedly see Nolan alive. Between those timestamps is approximately 90 minutes. And those 90 minutes may eventually become one of the most important windows in the investigation, but only if the underlying claim can be established. Imagine what investigators could potentially learn if the witnesses are independently confirmed. Who were they? Where were they? How did they recognize Nolan? What exactly did they see? How long did they see him? What time did they make the observation? Did they tell someone immediately? Did they contact authorities? Did anyone else see Nolan? Was there a photograph, a message, a video, a timestamp, a receipt, a boat record? Any independent evidence could potentially help anchor the timeline, and that is why this claim deserves examination rather than either automatic acceptance or automatic rejection. The defense says it matters. If it is true, it may matter enormously. But the burden of establishing it remains. And until that happens, the responsible description is simple. It is a claim made by the defense. Nothing more, nothing less. There is another question. Even if Nolan was alive at 5:50, what happened next? That is the unresolved portion of the timeline. Because a sighting would not explain the medical findings. It would not automatically explain how Nolan entered the water. It would not establish whether he was alone. It would not establish whether another person was involved. It would not establish whether the death was accidental. It would simply give investigators another fixed point. And sometimes, in an investigation, a single fixed point can change everything. A timeline can be reconstructed from fragments. A witness, a phone record, a boat movement, a photograph, a call, a message, a piece of video, a medical finding. One fact can connect another, but until those pieces are independently established, the picture remains incomplete. There is also the CTO recording. That issue has become part of the wider debate surrounding the case. Questions have been raised about what the recording captures, whether audio enhancement changes what can be heard, how any transcription was produced, and what legal implications the recording might have. But again, there is a boundary. The material used for this documentary does not contain complete answers to those questions. And where the evidence ends, the narration must stop. We are not going to invent what cannot be heard. We are not going to turn an unclear recording into a definitive statement, and we are not going to manufacture a conclusion simply because an unanswered question makes a better story. Because Nolan deserves better than that. His family deserves better. And even the people accused in this case deserve better. So let's strip away everything that does not belong. Nolan Wells was 18. He went to Horn Island on July 4th. He did not return home. A search followed. He was found in the water 2 days later. An official autopsy was conducted on July 7th. The official report remains sealed, according to the material examined here. The family commissioned an independent examination. That examination reportedly returned an undetermined conclusion. 3 young men who were with Nolan have publicly denied responsibility for his death. Their attorneys have challenged public accusations against them. The defense says the 3 young men left the island at approximately 4:30 p.m. The defense further claims that 2 people saw Nolan alive at approximately 5:50 p.m. Those witnesses have not been publicly identified in the source material examined here. And a grand jury is reportedly expected to consider matters connected with the investigation. None of that establishes guilt. None of it establishes innocence beyond what the available evidence supports. And none of it tells us exactly how Nolan died. That is the uncomfortable truth. The case remains unresolved. We do not have the complete publicly available medical explanation. We do not have the sealed autopsy report. We do not have the complete underlying evidence for the reported 5:50 sighting. We do not have public testimony from the 2 alleged witnesses. We do not have a definitive publicly established cause and manner of death. And we do not have a final investigative conclusion. Those gaps are not reasons to invent answers. They are reasons to keep investigating. For Nolan's parents, 6 weeks can feel like an eternity. Every unanswered question can become another reminder that their son is gone. They are not simply looking for someone to blame. At the most basic level, they want to understand. What happened? Why did Nolan not come home? Who saw him last? What happened during those final hours? And why does the available evidence still leave the cause and manner of death unresolved? Those questions are legitimate. They should be asked. But they should be asked responsibly. Because the search for an answer should not become a license to accuse someone without evidence. The 3 young men have their own questions. They say they have been portrayed as responsible for something they did not do. Their attorneys say the public narrative has gone beyond the evidence. They want their clients' names cleared. They have presented a timeline. They have challenged accusations. And they have pointed to alleged witnesses who could potentially support their version. That deserves examination. But examination is not endorsement. A documentary can report a defense claim without declaring that claim proven. That is the standard this case requires. Then there is the investigation itself. Investigators have access to information the public does not. That could include witness statements, records, communications, medical evidence, search information, and other investigative material. Some information may remain confidential because the investigation is ongoing. Some may eventually become public. And if the case reaches a formal legal proceeding, evidence may be tested in a way that public interviews cannot replicate. That is why the August 10th interview should be viewed for what it is, a significant public defense, not a final adjudication. It gives us claims. It gives us context. It gives us a timeline that deserves investigation, but it does not close the case. If you want to see what happens when those unanswered questions finally meet evidence, subscribe to this channel. Because this story should not end with today's strongest argument. It should continue as new records emerge, witnesses are identified, investigators make findings, and previously unavailable evidence becomes public. Subscribe so you can follow the investigation as it develops, not just the version of the story that happens to be trending today. And that brings us back to the question that began everything. What happened to Nolan Wells? At this point, there is no responsible way to answer that with certainty. We can reconstruct parts of the timeline. We can identify the known events. We can examine the claims made by the defense. We can acknowledge the family's unanswered questions. We can explain what an undetermined finding does and does not mean. But we cannot manufacture the missing pieces. And perhaps that is exactly where responsible investigative journalism should stand. At the edge of what is known, not beyond it. Because there is a temptation in true crime to turn uncertainty into certainty. To identify the villain before the evidence arrives. To take a suspicious detail and make it the explanation. To take a denial and treat it as proof. To take a theory and repeat it until it sounds like a fact. We cannot do that here. The facts deserve more discipline. Nolan cooked dinner for his family on July 3rd. He went to Horn Island on July 4. He never came home. He was found 2 days later. The official autopsy remains sealed. The independent examination reportedly returned an undetermined finding. The young men who were with Nolan deny responsibility. Their attorneys say they left the island at approximately 4:30 p.m. They say 2 people saw Nolan alive around 5:50 p.m. Those witnesses have not been publicly identified in the material examined here, and the investigation continues. That is where the story stands. Not with a verdict, not with a confirmed theory, not with an internet accusation, with unanswered questions, and one word, undetermined. Somewhere between July 3 and July 6 lies the answer Nolan's parents have been searching for. Somewhere inside that timeline are details that may explain what happened. A conversation, a movement, a sighting, a phone call, a boat, a witness, a piece of evidence that the public has not yet seen. Maybe the 90-minute window will eventually prove crucial. Maybe the alleged witnesses will provide a completely different understanding of the afternoon. Maybe additional evidence will confirm the defense timeline. Maybe investigators will uncover something that changes it. Or perhaps the eventual explanation will be something that neither side publicly anticipates today. That is why this story is not finished. And it is also why it should not be prematurely solved. The people who were with Nolan say they have told their story. Their attorneys say the evidence will ultimately clear them. The family continues to seek an explanation. Investigators continue their work, and the public waits. But there is one principle that should remain constant, regardless of which side someone sympathizes with. A claim is not a fact simply because someone believes it. A denial is not proof simply because it is confidently delivered. And uncertainty is not evidence of guilt. The only thing capable of resolving those differences is evidence. Documentation, corroboration, medical findings, witness testimony, investigative conclusions, facts that can withstand scrutiny. That is what Nolan deserves. His family deserves the truth, whatever that truth ultimately turns out to be. And the people publicly accused deserve a fair assessment based on evidence rather than assumption. So the question is not, who should we believe? The better question is, what can actually be proved? Because Nolan Wells deserves more than a viral theory. His family deserves more than a sealed page they cannot read. And the people publicly accused deserve more than guilt by association. The answer, whatever it eventually becomes, should come from evidence, not outrage, not algorithms, not social media, not speculation, not even the most compelling argument from a lawyer. Evidence. That is the story worth following. And until the unanswered questions are answered, this case remains exactly where the evidence says it is: open, unresolved, undetermined.